Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Salon podcast, a show about celebrating cinematography and inspiring both the current and next generation of visual artists, exploring the latest trends, techniques, technologies, and culture, and featuring exclusive interviews with some of the most talented and innovative cinematographers working today. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Cinematography Salon podcast. My name is Peter Pascucci, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ava Benjamin Shore. In this very special episode, we cannot wait to sit down with distinguished cinematographer Christopher Blauvelt. Chris's incredible career includes collaborations with directors including Todd Haynes on films like May December, starring Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore, as well as collaborations with Jonah Hill on Mid-90s, marking Jonah's directorial debut and showing off Chris's love for skateboarding and his roots in the LA punk scene. Chris has worked with directors like Kelly Reichardt on incredible films like Meek's Cutoff and First Cow, as well as Gus Van Sant on Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot. Chris is such a kind soul and talented and humble and just a hilarious person, and we're excited to talk about his unique approach, his philosophy on cinematography, and so much more. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me, you guys. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I wanted to first talk about kind of the unique upbringing that you had in LA and within sort of a filmmaking family and having a first AC as a father and neighbors who were stunt professionals. And I was kind of curious how this environment shaped your understanding of filmmaking. And I heard you talk about this amazing story about your realization of how unusual this upbringing was, particularly this experience of sharing with classmates at a really young age that you were kind of casually hanging out with Mr. T from the A-Team on set. So yeah, I'd just love to kind of hear you talk about your upbringing and where the genesis of your craft as a cinematographer began.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that that is a true story. I was born and raised, I'm third generation Hollywood family. Like my grandfather was a grip. My grandmother was a costumer for the Ice Capades. And yeah, at a young age, I didn't realize that other kids' parents didn't do this. So I didn't realize that it was special in any way or unique. There was a story of I was in elementary school and the A-Team was a huge show for all of us kids that age. And Mr. T was just like this iconic, amazing person. And over the weekend, I had gone to set and got to meet Mr. T. And so at school the next week, I was talking about it. And the response to the kids my age are just like, fuck you, man. No, you're a liar and this is bullshit. And so I went home and told my mother what happened. And she sort of explained to me like, look, honey, not all the other kids' parents do this. And so, yeah, that was a wake up call or sort of a realization that maybe what I'm involved with in my family was something kind of special.
I love that.
When I think about where I came from and where I'm at now, I never remember a life without a camera or a camera near me. And my dad brought me home a camera from a trip he had to Japan on a job. Even at a young age, I had this Polaroid. It was called a Handle. And it's like an indestructible plastic Polaroid camera. And I used to just, of course, take portraits of everybody. And it was just kind of my fun little thing that I had. I was obsessed with it. My mom told me there was a trip we were taking in our RV up to Carpinteria. And we were almost at the freeway. And I realized I didn't have film and I just had a complete meltdown and they had to turn around and take us back to the Rite Aid or whatever it was to load up on film. So it's something that was just always a part of my life. And to where I'm at now, when I look back, I can honestly say that it's just been something that I've been so grateful for. It was like I had a superpower, and it was later in the teens getting into skateboarding and punk rock and kind of being a wild kid. I think when I wasn't like the best at any of those things, I could always fall back to my camera, and it was a way to meet people. It still is. I can recall trips I've had to Europe, not knowing anyone, but because I had this little metal box in my hand, it was a gateway to meeting new friends or taking a Polaroid of a stranger at a bar or anywhere I was. I always sort of knew that I had this secret weapon that would help me in all of these different environments. So it's something that's super special to me, and I've never known life without it. I mean, even today, I shot a picture on the street. It's part of my career and my life. It's completely integrated into everything I do.
So cool. Yeah, I feel like it's very unique. I mean, I feel like for a lot of people, it's kind of like you have to prove to your parents that filmmaking is a good path or that it's sustainable, and it's just so cool that you've been steeped in it since forever. And I think specifically, I was very interested to hear about how your dad was a first AC and actually getting to work with him on projects, because I think that's even more rare. And yeah, I just would love to hear a little bit about how that affected your journey to where you are now, and yeah, what it was like kind of working with your family.
Yeah, I think it's something I'm super grateful for. I know that a lot of people I've met and worked with in my life haven't had that luxury, and I've been aware of it from the very beginning. And so it's something that I really make a point to help people that don't have the privilege that I've had. I've gotten many, many people in the union with me and friends, but it's also, even to this day, I like to make sure that I hire as a diverse crew as I can get and just sort of extend that privilege that I had through my family, personally do that for other people that I might not even know. It's something that I consider quite a bit in my life. But in regards to my father, again, it was my dad and my uncle, and they worked on Jaws, Rumblefish, Outsiders, and these amazing films that maybe I didn't even realize how special they were until I was old enough or in high school or teenage years. But for me, I had a real aversion to school. I hated it. I didn't like this sort of institutional, it felt like teachers felt very condescending. And my reaction to that was just like a complete shutdown. I couldn't focus on it. Once I got a skateboard in my hands and I started listening to Black Flag and Circle Jerks and the Germs, my sort of rebellion for it was just magnified. And so in high school, I just didn't go. I just stopped going. Literally, you'd get dropped off with a friend's mother or whatever, and they would go to school and I would go away from school. And I'd sit on a skateboard in a park and I would stare at ants all day. And it would be the best day of my life every time. And there was some exceptions. I really liked my photography teacher and I had an art teacher. And I think that's to the point of my sort of lifestyle, and the things that I look out for or am aware of are very much integrated with art and poetry, and I'm finding beauty in lots of other things. So at a certain point, I remember I had just gotten out of jail. I was 16, 17, and my dad saw the writing on the wall, and he says to me, "You got to come check this out or you're going to be delivering pizzas for the rest of your life because you're stupid and you have no education now." So, so I honestly, I had to have a real internal moment, real time of reflection, I guess, and to where I was headed or what I was doing. Because also in another way, I saw my dad, my uncle, they don't come home from work at 5 o'clock when my other friends' parents are coming home. So I didn't want any part of that. I knew that that was a commitment that was, maybe worse than jail in some ways, because I wouldn't be able to go to the punk show at night. I wouldn't be able to skate or surf with my friends. So I did fight it in regards to just the work ethic part of it. But once I got in and got my feet wet and I experienced the electric department, prop department, lighting, I worked as a stagehand for this local 33, which is all stagehands. And that was such a really great place to be as a 17-year-old kid making crazy money. But I was also getting this experience that was very well rounded. I was able to really look at a set and see how it functioned and gravitate to what I gravitated to. And then eventually my dad took me to, in Culver City where Sony is, it used to be it had a different name. And back in those days, there was a camera department on the lot. So the camera department would be where you go and sort of exchange gear, and they would order from Panavision, but also they would load the magazines for all the jobs. So there would be a person on a golf cart and they would go and you pick up 3 mags and you drop off 3 unexposed mags. So my dad took me there day one, and he knew one of the people working in there. And he said, "Hey, can you teach my boy how to load?" And that same day, the guy's like, "Just don't turn the lights on, kid." And I'm loading for like these giant studio movies. It's I was sweating it at first, but then you just sort of get in the groove. And that was my first experience loading film. And then eventually my dad brought me out on a TV show and I got to be the sort of camera PA, and it was great. My dad was fantastic. And as hard as he could be, he was also someone that would explain something to you in a way that you would follow through. It was always about follow through. Like, ask yourself why you're getting that certain tool. And instead of just fulfilling that mission, okay, I got you the tool, now they can do it. Like, find out why. What is that tool? What does it do? And that's the kind of work ethic that I think really just helped me get my way. And then I was kind of tired of the stigma of working with my family. So I immediately broke out and met other people in these jobs. And then I got to be this person that I had so many different crews that would call me. So I was working on all of these action films, and I worked on the Lethal Weapons, and I worked on Speed and Geronimo and The Patriot and these big films. But I think in the mid 90s, I had met Harris Savides, who's a legendary cinematographer. And he's the one that changed my life in a way that I never expected, where I was a proud worker. And like my dad being a first AC for 40 something years, like it's a very honorable position. So I would never let anybody sort of think that that's not an important function or, person on a set. But, there are some mentalities which would be like, you're doing this to become the director, you're doing this to become the DP. But I don't think of it that way. And that's because of the work ethic that my family had and my dad, my uncle had in that regard. And I think there's a lot of pride there, and there should be. But what happened when I met Harris was I realized I could work on films that I like. I was doing good at my job and I was getting hired all the time, but I was sort of another cog in this giant thing. And I didn't know that I could go and work with Gus Van Sant. Harris was the one that sort of brought me into that idea. And that really changed my trajectory in a huge way. Harris asked me to do the first Gus Van Sant I did as an AC. First film I did as a first AC, which was called Jerry. And I've never left that world. Like, that's my home. Now I make indie films as a cinematographer, but that was a huge, huge trajectory shift for me meeting Harris.
Hey, Chris, can I tell you a funny anecdote?
Yeah, please.
I actually have a crew jacket from Jerry.
No way.
Yeah, I've got to dig it out and show you sometime, but I worked with a key grip that worked on it. And when I found out, I was so excited that he gave me his jacket from it.
Wow. That's amazing. Who is that?
Bud?
Oh, Bud. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a big, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Bud's the best. Yeah. I mean, that job. And that's another thing here to talk about trajectory changing and figuring out your place. I think those jobs, and they're so small, they're independent, but it's all heart. Everyone is there with the camaraderie level is through the roof. Like, you become like an army platoon. And that's why people like Bud and that crew, there's a bond there that we'll never forget. And that job was so hard. We were in Death Valley in July. It was 126 degrees. It was crazy. But when you deal with something like that as a team and you're still functioning and getting the job done, there's nothing that brings you together more.
It's so cool to hear about you meeting Harris and the influence he had on you. When you saw some of the images that you had helped make with him, was that a different experience than having seen like action films that you'd worked on? Like, when you saw Jerry projected, were you like, what the fuck?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. I think that, well, what happened when I met Harris, we were working on tons of commercials together, and I was a second AC. I was a second and a loader. And we were working with David Fincher when he had Propaganda, and we were doing all these big high-profile commercials. We were working for Mark Romanek. We were doing the coolest stuff. Like, Harris was just the one. Everyone wanted to work with Harris. And another part of the work ethic that I took from him is testing and exploring, because back then there was no digital. But what was happening was Kodak's film was getting more colorful and contrasty. It was becoming more HD. And Harris hated it. He loved film. He liked the texture and the quality of film. But he was one that was really looking to discover new things. And he would never use the same gear on one job to the next. It was always like, let's start over. What is this now? And that's something that I've kept with me. You know, it's like if you really want to respect the script as its own entity, what you should do, obviously, in my opinion, is take your ego out of it, take all the stuff you've learned. Obviously, you have that in your database, right? You know different tricks from your experience, and those are good to keep. But I think that it's really important to make the look of your film bespoke to that specific script. And there's times where I'll read a script and I'll really identify with it or really connect to it. And I'll think in my head, okay, maybe one of these things I've tested in the past could be a part of this. But instead of just taking that recipe that I have documented in my books and everything else, I'll go and retest it. Let's go retest it. Maybe we'll find a new filter, we'll find a new lens or something and make a new combination that will be specific to that look. And that's another one of those Harris-isms that I keep with me. But yeah, back to your original question. I was in the room with Harris as an assistant and he let me in. I was the guy taking the notes and I would take the Polaroid and we would make these books and you write little lines and like key light 5.6 and the shadow side is 2.8 and I would know everything. So we would test and test and then we would go to the theater and we would project. And there's nothing better than being in that room because you're looking at your film under a microscope. It's blown up to a theater screen. So it was always and still is the best way to really learn what you're doing, like what the functionality of something might be and how it looks. So that's something that I really love. But yeah, those early days of projecting stuff with Harris was just such a special time because he made you feel limitless. Like I've never done a commercial in my life where I've gotten 2 weeks to test to make a look for a commercial, but Harris did. And it was because people were smart. Mark Romanek wanted to make things that looked so different and unique that he trusted Harris. What do you need? And Harris would say, I don't know. Let me go to work. Let me do it. So we would get paid. I mean, I'm not even kidding, to do a commercial or maybe a music video, and we would test for sometimes up to 2 weeks. And so that's something that's just, I don't know if I'll ever be in that position or anyone ever will anymore, but it was really special. And again, we learned so much.
Yeah.
So cool.
Holy shit. This brings up a interesting topic I wanted to get into with you, because I think if there's anyone out there working right now that has such a fine sense of what is possible on film, it would be you. Like I'd put you in that club, given the work you've done as a DP and as an AC, which also makes me kind of surprised to see the images that you get out of digital. Like First Cow, May December, those films look like they were shot on 35 millimeter. They don't have like a digital bone in their construction. And I guess I'm curious, we don't have to like keep beating this dead horse for years and years, but like, what is the point of shooting on film at this time? When I see images that you've created, I go, the thing that people say you're getting out of film, people like Blauvelt are finding that. They're finding it in a digital image. It just makes me wonder, like, is hubris the reason that people are still shooting on film? Is it just purely we like the process of shooting on film? Do you find that shooting on film like adds anything as a tool set anymore?
Yeah, I think this is a crazy question in a way because, okay, one, thank you. I'm grateful for your appreciation of the look. And I want you to understand that the reason that those films look that way is through discipline. I think when it's Kelly Reichardt or Todd Haynes comes to you, and all of the references are from old films that look very beautiful, filmic, texturized, that contrast that lives within those layers. I think the next thing that happens for me is, okay, I'm going to take all of these inspirations and I'm going to find our recipe that works for us. And it's not a philosophy of let's make this look like film. It's inherent to the inspiration material that's come. And I'm a film lover as well. I know what it looks like. And I think that there's ways definitely to get there. And again, I appreciate that you acknowledge that. And I like when people do. But to me, it's more about just making that film look like itself. That's it. And yes, our inspirations and our love of film is a part of that idea. So, like going back to the discipline, it's like if you're putting a real honest discipline on what you're testing to find what you're doing, then that's what we did. And that's why it looks that way. But when you want to compare digital to film, it's a bit of a subjective idea, because if you talk to Yorgos, he'll say, why would I go through all this trouble on my digital to make something that I just shoot on film and I don't mess with it? And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And that works. And I still love shooting film, but I don't want to be in one of these camps where I'm like either this or that. I think it goes back to the thing I was trying to point out before, which is all of these things are tools for any of us to use to make something special. And just one other side note to the film part on the film camp here is that the film stocks have gotten so good. They're too damn good. Like Kodak should have stopped trying to be HD and just been themselves. Like let it be film. So when like my gaffer Jesse Wine goes out to shoot something on film, or someone that I know, or I'm mentoring some kids, I really try to make sure that they understand a couple things. And one of them, maybe the most important thing, is to really remember the latitude of the film is so huge that if you're laying your exposure in somewhere close to your key and you scan that film in, guess what? It's going to look like HD. And so my reaction to that, when I want film to look like film, I have to shit on this. I have to like light it on fire. You know, there's so many things that I'm trying to do to bring that grain and texture out again. And I know that it's scary. I was just talking to this kid, Edson, who I really love. And he's this young kid who's shooting and he's making amazing work. And he was shooting in Mexico. And I was literally running down the exposures of his room with him. He's like, key light from the windows of 5.6, but it falls off to a 0.5 in the back. And I'm like, okay, this is just my advice. And of course, he comes back to me and he's like, you're crazy. Like, you can't underexpose that much. And I don't want to scare him too much, but I do want to remind him, Harris used to tell me, like, if you're not scared, you're not challenging yourself. And if you're laying that exposure right where it needs to be, your film, after you scan it, you're going to be adding grain onto it later in digital because it's so good. So my reaction to all of that is to, when I shoot film, I underprocess it. I'll flash it sometimes and I'll underexpose the shit out of it. Like I really read for like mid-90s, I would read my bubble all the way to the sky. It was a 16 2/3 in the sun. Even if I had some shadows and trees in the background, that would be my base stop. But I was also rating my film at 25 ASA instead of 50. And I was pulling it all one stop without compensating for the pull. So I'm pushing it down. And then when you pull it back up in your timing, that's where you start to feel it. That's where you start to see your grain again. So it's
so
a tricky
cool.
thing, but it's like art to me is subjective. And I know it is to everyone else. Like, you know, you like movies that maybe I don't like. We all have to have this or the world wouldn't be the same. So I think that if you just think about it as everything can be your tool and don't put yourself into those categories because it's going to hamstring you. I think that idea that like, are you a film person or are you digital? Do we even need film anymore? I think that's a bad way to consider it because like someone just recently asked me in a class, I did this really beautiful class with Christine Bouchon in New York with her students. And one of the questions was about AI and how I felt about it. And my initial knee-jerk reaction, and I wasn't trying to be a dick or anything, I literally said those words, like, just understand me. I don't care. I think of it as there's going to be something that I might be able to use and put into one of my recipes. So if anything, I'm more excited about it. And yeah, maybe it's going to take my job, and that was a dumb move to say. But honestly, I think that every time technology evolves and we get better and the sensors get better and the film stock changes. It's just another entity in making your recipes for your films. Like, I'll look at any lenses, I'll look at any cameras, like there's going to be some sort of Frankenstein of these different things that are going to make you super happy, or they're going to be super perfect for a job you're going to do, you know? So to me, I like to keep as open-minded as possible to all of these new things. And maybe someday, you know, when I get to test them and look at them, I'll find a way to break it and then rebuild it and find something unique that will adapt into something I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like in a way there's no coincidence that what Ava recognizes in the work of being so beautifully shot in a way that does emulate film when you shoot on digital, like I'm sure there's no coincidence in how many years you spent loading film, looking at film, projecting film, seeing Kodak stocks change. Like there is a side of this that's like really technically brilliant, and I feel like is credit to like all of your experience. And I feel like it's just kind of interesting to think about a DP who's maybe never shot on film probably wouldn't be able to achieve that look digitally. And of course, like what you're saying, it's like they're all tools, and like someone shooting digital might make something different that's beautiful in a way, and like that makes sense. But it's just really impressive to see that level of skill that you have for that. I think it's something that is very unique to your work. That's super brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say something actually, because you were mentioning like maybe, you know, kids that might not have had the experience in film. But I think, again, just because film, like art, like poetry, like paintings, like anything else is all subjective. I think that a certain naivety with things that we're doing, because it's an art form, I think can be really beautiful. I work here in my studio. My friend Sal, he makes these punk rock zines, and he's a really amazing photographer. And he asks me for advice sometimes. And I love, he takes like impromptu, you know, street photography. And I start to give him advice on compositions and things like that. And every single time I do it, I have to stop and say, I don't want this thing that I know to constrain the beauty of what he's doing. And I feel that, you know, maybe some of the things, like just in little compositional type things, I've given him advice and I think that it's helped him in that way. But there's something that's so beautiful about what this kid does that I don't want my history to become a formula that he starts to pay attention to, because I don't want him to change. I like what he's doing, you know? So there's a certain part of being in the business for my entire life where I have to sort of debrief myself sometimes. And I've done jobs. I operated on a job with Harris and Gus Van Sant. I was trying to get them to shoot the proper over because Gus went on the other side of the line. And I was like, Gus, can we just move the camera over here? And he just says, why? And I tried to explain something where I'm 100% sure he knows, but he's sort of challenging me. And I don't even want to be that person to him, but I feel like I'm protecting him at that point. And I'm just like, Gus, like she's going to look that way and he's going to look that way. And they're not going to be when you intercut that. And he's like, well, who cares? I don't care. And then now I just feel like a punk. And he's like, pretty much just like called me a bitch. And I'm like, I want to be the fucking artist too, man. You know, I don't want to be a cop in this situation. So that's just one of those things that I don't know. I feel like, man, kids that maybe have never touched film, I can't wait for them to do it, because their naivety could end up being something that's like the new look that everybody's after for the next 10 years. You know what I mean? So to me, it's just an open forum. And I know where I come from. I'm very proud. I'm very grateful for my experience and my life and my family, and obviously getting to work with Harris and learning from him. But it's also, like I said, sometimes I feel that the rules are there to be broken.
What you're saying does kind of remind me of something I heard about Bradford Young, where he used to like scour thrift stores for old family photos because he wanted to see how images looked when they're shot by an untrained eye.
Wow.
You know, and I always thought that was really interesting.
That's really cool. Yeah, see, it's like you can find knowledge, you can gain things from just having an open, curious mind like that. Like, I love hearing that. That's so cool. You know, that's the same way that when someone gives me a piece of music to listen to or something that's very unrelated to what we do, and you find a strange connection in there. And that's the most special thing. Like, I love going to museums. I was just last summer at the Prado in Madrid, and it's like, I'm so inspired. There's so many things that you can pull into your own life and work. They can come from anything. It can be a smell. Like, if you're open to it that way, I think that's a good place to be in regards to just creating what you're creating and finding influences from anywhere, from people, from friends. It doesn't matter. It really opens up your world, I think, if you're open to experiencing things like that.
I love that. I kind of wanted to rewind just a little bit to go into something deeper, which, it sounds like with Harris, there were so many lessons about rigorous testing and doing what was right for the film in an innate way. And I also heard that you said that there's certain things that you brought into your practice and maybe expanded upon, in the sense that you sometimes do blind testing with projects that you're working on. And I just found that to be really interesting. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, I guess, how you came up with the approach of blind testing and why you think it's so important to kind of retain that like subjectivity and that like trying to just speak to the core of the project.
Yeah, I think that this is, I guess, getting into my process and probably a lot of other people's process, but it starts with your inspiration material that you'll get from your director. And this can be music, photography, paintings, color palettes, swatches of clothes. It could be any different thing. So now you're put to the task to take those inspirations and then go into the technical side of things, which is, in our world, it's lights, it's lenses, it's filters, it's cameras, it's all of these things. It's film processing, it's a ton of different things. So as soon as I physically can start, I'll start to do tests. And sometimes I'll do broad strokes in the camera rental house, and I'll sort of eliminate things in a big sense. And that's just me sort of narrowing it down. So when I'm showing my director, it's not a 5-hour test. I can sit them down and say, this will be 40 minutes of something. And then we'll have slates. And the slates will say on the back, it'll say the lens, the filter, the aperture, the ASA, like all of the technical things, the type of lens, etc. And so we'll go through it together, and then we'll make our notes, me and Sean Baller, my DIT, and my camera department, and maybe my gaffer. And so when we get to a place where we're going to show the director, hopefully I've minimized it again down to like a half hour or something. But what's happening now is they're seeing a test, and you know what it's like when you're doing a very technical test. It's very boring, and you're looking, because you want it to be fair. You want to have the same aperture on each lens and see each lens with the same filter. And so you can really kind of decipher and understand the differences between all of these things. But the best part is when you're starting to get close with your director and you can feel it. And now you're getting into like the granular sense of the imagery. And then I turn the slates off. I'll make an edit where we just show now the images without the slates. So there's, even for myself, there's no more bias there. Like, maybe I know the lens well enough where I know it, or maybe we know it, but I've also been tricked. I've tricked myself as well. But there's a time where you get to with your director, and she or he will say to you, what's that? I like that. Okay, let's play it again. And if they keep honing in on that thing, now you can say, like, is this it? Did we find the look of our film? And when we all agree, then we know what we've picked. It's more about making sure that there's no bias in it, because maybe you picked a Cook Pancro earlier on in the test, and then later you're going towards Kawas or Baltars or something like that, It's kind of good to separate that and really look at it and see how it makes you feel. And then one other thing I'd just like to point out is, when I do my tests, it's really important for me when I'm showing my director. Like, we can always do our technical tests in the rental house with the Christmas lights and the defocus and the model and the flower, whatever you want in the chart. But when I'm showing my director, I put as many layers from our film as I possibly can. And this goes to costume, maybe my double is a close representation of my actor. I'm on a set, ideally. I have props, I have curtains, anything I can get to make it look like our film, because now I'm putting it into the context of our film. And you're not like looking at a pretty model in a parking lot at rental house. So that was a lesson I learned on my very first film I did with Kelly. I did show her that test, and it was the nerd tech test. And she was just like, what the F is this? And I realized I just can't do that, and I don't want to. And then what I realized is that when I go to each of the departments, like, hey, I'm doing a test on Friday. I know you guys are just starting to collect your stuff, but if you can give me the sweater that you're thinking about, give me a prop or anything I can do to layer it in the realm of our project, it really does help.
That's so cool to hear. I love that you bring a director so deep into the testing and the technology of what you're doing. That's really inspiring to hear.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know. I think this whole thing is, the more collective it can be, the better experience I have. And I really honestly believe that all of the other departments have, when you're just completely transparent. And I mean, I love giving authority to my crew, because if they're a part of the testing stage, you can make rules for yourself that are related to this film. How do we want to do this? Like on Todd's movie, it was a lot to do with reflections and mirrors. So we all had our eyes out for it. It wasn't just me. So I'm opening this up to my crew that I trust and I love. And when you give people around you that sort of equity in what you're doing, guess what? They're really involved because they have a voice there. And obviously there's a time and a place. It's like not anyone can just come up to me and say, hey, really, you're going to shoot a 50 right here? That's a strange. You know what I mean? That won't happen. But it's like, to a certain extent. Because like also, I don't consider myself the god of composition. I don't consider myself the god of any fucking thing. So it's like, sometimes I get tired. And I know that my gaffer or my first AC or DIT or opera, someone's going to remind me like, hey, Blauvelt, remember when you said we want to do that? I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Let's do that. I don't want my ego to get in the way of making good work, ever.
Yeah. I'd be curious if we could go more into some of the directors you've worked with, because I think that they kind of have a broad range of perspectives that they bring into filmmaking. And I guess I wanted to maybe start with Kelly Reichardt. I was just curious like how that collaboration started and kind of how it's changed over time. And if you can like tell us a little bit more about your guys' relationship.
Of course. I love Kelly, and I really consider her one of the best filmmakers on the planet. I really honestly do. And when I first met her, it was Meek's Cutoff, and her DP that started the film, they just weren't getting along, or she wasn't happy. So things were going to change. And my assistant at the time, Steve McDougall, we had just finished the job together. And he told the producer, who I also knew from Gus films, from Paranoid Park, Neil Kopp, he said, Chris is shooting. You should give Chris a call. And so I hadn't done anything yet. I did this small movie with my AC just before that, but, it wasn't anything to speak of. And I was on a plane reading the script, thinking that I was going to get fired the next day. But what happened was I realized that she just wanted something specific. And I think that she wanted a collaborator also. Not to say that other DPs weren't. I just think there's personalities now, or there's another reason. And I think that I came in and I had the confidence of my lifelong experience on a movie set. And I had to even remind myself, like, you got this and you've done this before, and use your knowledge and experience and go for it. And I really, really honestly just listened to her. I just listened to her describe her film to me, and I listened to her describe the aesthetic, and I feel like I just understood it. And we've been together ever since. And it's just gotten better now, because obviously there's a shorthand. But, she's a real director, and she does her homework. There's so much research done, and there's so much put into the aesthetic that she's after, that I don't want to say it's easy, but the homework is already done. Now it's my perception of this, or my input and collaboration, but it's all based on respecting the script that she's written and all the inspiration. And it's honestly, it's like that for every job that I do. I think if you really just want to care about it and try your best to do good work, there's just these common things that you should understand, which is just really try to understand, respect, and just appreciate all of the inspirations that have been brought to you. And there's nothing better also that when you're bringing something else in that's related to this. You know, when I bring something to Kelly or I bring something to Todd that's rooted in the initial sort of core fundamental idea of it, that's the best thing you can ever do. It makes you feel so good because you're providing your service, you're providing what they hired you to do, and you're elevating it now. And that's a good place to be, I think, because even for me and for other DPs, it's like you're in a position to understand that you're a part of it. You know, you're helping, your ideas, your composition, whatever it might be, is working towards the initial idea that your director brought you. And it feels really good. And if you can bring your team along board with that concept, that idea, that feeling, now you're living in an elevated space. That's something that's even hard for me to articulate. But because it's so important for me to sort of rally my gang around me and let them be a part of all of it, and that's good and bad, you know, like, so when we have a real success on a shot that was hard to design or took a lot of work and a lot of all of our brain power and resources to do it, like, you better believe I'm looking around at these people and thanking them. I want them to be as happy as I am about it, you know? And that's, again, bringing your team on board with you. Let them celebrate the good work with you, or just straight up thank them. You know, sometimes I'm just like, thank you. You made that happen. Even my third grip, I saw them, they're working their ass off. Like, they should get some of the credit. It's not all about me, you know? Like, I get enough. I'm doing interviews. Like, who the fuck am I? Like, it's a collective, you know what I mean? I don't deserve it. It's not me. It's us. It's a big group of really talented, really amazing human beings that make what we make.
Yeah. It's really interesting to hear you talk about all this stuff. Like, I can't help but think about skateboarding, because to me, what skateboarding did for my life was it made me appreciate overlooked locations. It put a spotlight, it put beauty into, you know, abandoned, decrepit things, made you look at things in a different way. And also just, I don't know who your friends were skateboarding, but my dad would call my friends model inmates. You know, like, you kind of roam around the city and you hang out with houseless people and punks. And I mean, it just runs the gamut. You know, it's like you're just really in the thick of life, you know? And I think that it kind of, I mean, occasionally you'll find someone who's kind of a jerk and is really full of themselves, but a lot of the time it's like you're just hanging out with everyone that exists out there and you're not above anyone. And it makes me think of like the way that you share the set with other people in the community and just look at everyone as equals. And, you know, the way I think of like you shoot the the arts college in Showing Up, you know, which is just like such a funny place to set a movie, because I drove by that a million times growing up and I was like, never would have thought you'd shoot a movie there, you know, or like the desert in Eastern Oregon, which is like definitely not the pretty part of Oregon. And I'm just like, there are things about your work where I'm like, you're capturing that feeling of appreciating people in places that are overlooked.
Yeah, that's one of the best compliments I think I've had. And it's funny, I never really related it to what you're saying, but it makes perfect sense. Like, once you have a skateboard in your hand and realize that anything can be ridden, it gives you a new perspective on what that is. Like, oh, look at that weird curve in this alley filled with trash. And you look at it as like the coolest thing ever. That is a really good thing to relate to. I like that you said it that way, because it is, again, it's just your perspective, isn't it? That's like something that I think that's why it makes Kelly's work so special, because she's really interested in the thing that's in between the thing. She's interested in the car ride to the crash, like, not the crash. And I think that that's what life is like. But of course, we're making movies, so it's a lot to do with these heightened experiences and these dramatic situations that happen. But when you subvert that idea like Kelly does, it makes for a really special interaction between the audience and the film. There's something really special about it. And it goes back to my experience with Bresson and watching this slow cinema of like Chantal Ackerman or Agnes Varda, and that thing where you find yourself leaning in because you're not getting it all hand fed to you. And I love it. It's like this certain trust is given to you. It feels like they're respecting you as a human now, not just like, here's the insert of the key going in the door and the sound. It's not like this. I don't know how to even articulate that, but it's something that feels really special when you can have that interaction with the film, again, as a subjective art form, but it's like doing something to you that maybe is just not typical.
Yeah.
Hi, we are excited to announce our partnership with Laowa Lenses by Venus Optics. Laowa has had a long history of providing cinematographers with unique and state-of-the-art lens options, including their recent Proteus 2x anamorphic series, which remains the most accessible T2.0 option in the market for professional production. A big thank you to SanDisk for helping support our show as well as part of their Relentless reliability campaign. The extreme portable solid-state drive has become an essential on film sets and a personal favorite of mine for how durable, reliable, and fast it is. SanDisk leads in drive and memory card technology, emphasizing not just storage, but everything worth keeping. We'd also like to thank our partner at Fujifilm. We're very grateful to them for supporting not just the podcast, but a lot of what we do at the Cinematography Salon. And with the release of their latest camera, GFX 100 II, they release a tool that opens up new creative possibilities. It's brands like these that remind us why we do what we do. It's more than just support. It's about being part of a community that values every shot and every story.
I love hearing about your appreciation for that type of cinema and working with Kelly. I think it might also be interesting to talk about the flip side of maybe working on a film like this, and that like maybe it doesn't get the most love from distributors. And I was wondering if you could tell that story about the advertising budget for First Cow and what you did about it.
That's funny. I guess not a lot of people know about that, but okay, so it was a New York Times article put First Cow as like one of their top Oscar. It was like their number one pick out of 10 films that year. And I thought to myself, oh, wow, is Kelly going to finally get this recognition in that domain? And I had some calls with Kelly, but Kelly's a punker. Like, she honestly does not care. Like, it's never about that for her. She just wants to make her films. And anyway, A24 made that film. And I was seeing posters for this really great film, by the way, called Minari in my neighborhood. And I was just waiting for ours. Where's our posters? Like, there's no billboards or even commercials. So I emailed my friends at A24, and they said to me in the most polite, like, they're really great people. And they said, Blauvelt, listen, man, Kelly doesn't do any of this press or all this stuff that's after. So like, our budget's super small and they're not pushing with someone who's not wanting to play the game. And I'm like, okay, whatever, fair enough. But I was still kind of pissed because I really was proud of our movie. So I went and I made a giant silk screen. I have one in here I can find you. I made a giant silk screen with my friends downtown, and I spray paint stencil, and I made probably about 500 homemade wheat paste posters. So I went up around LA. I sent some to Portland, to Chicago, to New York. And it was so funny because like I'm putting up like a on this like crazy, I live in Hollywood. So they're like these amazing, crazy millions and millions of dollars. And I'm putting up, it's like I'm putting up like grandma's quilt, like on it, like this homemade thing. But it was cool when people would see it, like, what the fuck is that? It's literally like a cow on a barge with some cool art. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like interesting how many DP's origin stories are like skating, and like hearing some of the stuff you talked about is so nostalgic for me. Like, I especially loved what you said about the camera being a way to connect to other people. And Ava, you talking about the things that we take with us into our work now from those days, like wandering around the streets and just having that lifestyle, is so true. I also think that one thing that I think about, and some of what you said, Chris, was making me think about this, was like when I was a kid, you'd go out and you'd be out for like 13 hours, 14 hours, just like roaming and shooting, and how much of that kind of carries into the work we do now, like long hours, and also just like trying to get the shot right for a skate video. It's like you do it 100 times, and now like we're on set and we'll like do takes. Like there's so many like lessons that I feel like have carried through from that lifestyle into cinematography. And yeah, I just love it. And it's so cool to hear you guys talk about some of this stuff. Yeah, I kind of wanted to jump to like mid 90s because I just feel like we have to talk about that now. I heard this amazing anecdote about Jonah talking about, and maybe it was something that the two of you did, I'd love to hear you talk about it, but it was essentially like giving the cast a camera, like a classic skate HVX or whatever, and in between takes, they would go and shoot their own skate film in tandem with the actual shot listed film that you guys were creating. And Jonah just like spoke a little bit about how when he made it to the editing room, like seeing all of this footage was just like seeing a whole nother movie that was created during that process. And I just thought that story was like so inspiring to have like done that back in the day. And then to hear someone like you and Jonah Hill talk about putting that technique into like an actual major film, and like just that feeling of watching a skate video in the editing rooms, like so cool to me. So yeah, I'd just love to hear you talk a little bit about that experience and just mid 90s in general and what that meant to you as a skater.
Yeah, I think that movie really was a special film for me because of the skateboarding, and skateboarding being such a part of my life and Jonah's life. And it's funny, when I met Jonah, it was my wife's birthday, and we were at Musso and Frank's in Hollywood. And I had seen Jonah and Spike and Jeff Tremaine sitting in a booth, but I only knew Spike. And again, I had my Polaroid camera with me, and I said to some friends, I'm like, watch, I'm gonna go fuck with these guys right now. And so I'm walking up to this table as if I'm just like a paparazzi or something like that. And I saw Jonah, who I didn't know. He's looking at me like waving his hand like, hey, get out of here. And I get in front of this table like, come on, guys, let me just take a picture. $5, $5. And Spike like threw a napkin at me and said, fuck you, Blauvelt. And so it was this funny kind of moment. But what happened was that Spike was helping Jonah develop that film together. And Spike said to Jonah, that's the guy that's going to shoot your movie. I'll bet you like a number of dollars or whatever. Like, that's the guy. And so later that night, after they bought us like chicken livers with a candle in it for my wife, like thinking that they were funny, they come over to the table and Jonah's like staring at me like, hey, I'd really like to just like take you to dinner or something, whatever. And I was like, okay, cool, man. Nice to meet you. And then sure enough, I went to meet Jonah, and he sort of gave me the whole pitch and the idea about his film. And it's like, I'm in, man. This is it. Like we were fast friends. And over the course of the next couple of years, because the movie got pushed a little bit, we became really tight. And we worked really hard on what the sort of philosophy on showing these kids was going to be, and what our influences were, and how to like really respect that genre. And skaters, not unlike punkers, are really hardcore about getting it right. You can't mess that up. So we had people like Heidi Bevins and Jameen Aza really making sure that the costumes, that the production design was all right in time. And in regards to the VX1000 with the fisheye on it, like that's the camera. That's the one that all the classic videos are shot on. And that was Jonah's idea. Of course, there's going to be a filmer, and that's Ryder, who is kind of based on Spike pretty much. And we let them film each other. And they were all really good skaters, by the way. Like Sonny was one of the best, the lead in it. He's one of the best skaters. And but the funny thing is, when they went out to skate, he couldn't be the best. He always had to dumb it down. But yeah, we let them film and make their own movie, which is a big part of what you do when you're that age, and what, the kids go out in the gang. There's always the one kid who's going to be the filmer. I had to have like 5 of those cameras because they would break also. And we had the art department scar them all the same way, so if one broke, we could easily just swap it out. I had one day had a realization that nobody was filming Ryder. So occasionally, like, I would skate and I would film him doing some stuff. But those kids they made a fantastic film on their own because they're funny as hell and they're good skaters. Yeah, but that was a fun element of making that film.
So cool.
Yeah. I'd be curious if you could talk about what your process working with Jonah is like, because it does seem like he is a different character than Kelly. Like watching Stutz or mid 90s, like his personal life is so embedded in even like the surface level idea of what this is about, you know? And he's such a public facing person as being like a big name actor. And I just find it so amusing and like kind of startling, like how honest he is, like in front of people, like calling his therapist an asshole, but then really breaking down his emotions. I'm just like, that's got to be such a different experience than working with, maybe it's not, I don't know, than working with Kelly. Maybe it's the same. I don't know.
No, I think it's different in a handful of ways, but I mean, that's a good point to bring up. I think Jonah's personal life, he's made it integrated into the filmmaking, especially in Stutz. I mean, that's his therapist. And then in the film itself, you know, Jonah had like a meltdown and thinking that we weren't doing good work. And so he's the one that made that shift happen in that film. And I think opening up that vulnerability was what makes that film so good. I think besides the fact that Phil Stutz is a genius and an amazing philosopher, that as a film to observe that person and then respect him, I think Jonah discovered that he had to be vulnerable. And that was huge. That was something that we'd never been a part of. I didn't know how to react to that. It was like, we kind of all knew he was doing the right thing, but it wasn't what we planned. And that's a beautiful thing. I think he's such an evolved person. And that shows someone who's willing to stick their neck out and be the vulnerable one for the sake of respecting the product and the project. So that was a big epiphany that I've never dealt with on a film before. But I don't know, all my directors are unique in their own ways. And I think that I'm grateful that they gravitate to me. I'm grateful that I have these relationships with them. And I also respect and cherish the differences, you know? Working with Gus, getting to shoot for Gus was like, it took me a while to even process. It was so huge. I didn't know how to even really understand it. It was like I was in tears. It was crazy. Harris would have been the one to shoot that film. So how do I honor and respect that situation? You know, that one was really crazy, but in a beautiful way. So it's something that I'm grateful for. I'm grateful to get the call from anyone, actually. Like, I just want to understand what they're doing. And if they're passionate about what they're doing, then I'm in, you know? I'm so in. I want my films to be diverse too. But it's obvious that everybody has their own sort of subjective taste. You know, I did Emma. I went and did Emma with Autumn de Wilde, who's a dear friend of mine. And the first thing she said to me when she asked me to do that film was, I'm going to lose all my punk rock points, but that I have to do that film. So what am I, you know, of course I'm doing that film. And to me, because it was my sort of biggest, most, I mean, COVID kind of shot it down in a huge way, but because it was the movie that was going to have commercials and billboards and be this, you know, studio Jane Austen film, I thought it was kind of hilarious. Like, who's going to expect me to do that? And for me, I was like, okay, great. This is going to show some diversity and also just like a big middle finger to anybody who thinks that they can pin me down.
Chris, you kind of touched on this briefly, referring to people saying you were going to lose your punk rock credits for working on Emma, but I've also heard you speak really articulately about being really excited at the challenge of working on projects that are maybe outside of your normal scope and not thinking of that necessarily as daunting, but thinking about it as like an awesome way to kind of grow your palette. And I'd just love to hear you talk about kind of your philosophy on leaning into challenge and trying to sort of diversify the work in a way that doesn't allow you to get pigeonholed in any way.
Yeah, I don't really consider it a fear of being pigeonholed, more so than being excited to learn something from a new challenge. So I was thinking about this earlier today, actually, but it was after Autumn asked me to do Emma, which is a Jane Austen period drama or comedy in a way. This is something like my mother grew up with, and I wanted to just respect what that was. And the first things that I tested were film. It was a bit like grainy, and I was sort of putting too much of my personal aesthetic onto something that didn't deserve it. But again, it goes back to like, you're going to learn that in the discipline of your testing. If you're honest about trying to respect something that might not be your life or your story or even your aesthetic, right? If you're honest about that, you have to take your ego out of it. And I did. That's without a doubt sort of the cleanest film I've ever done. But it's not all the way clean either. Like, I did dirty it up just enough to make it feel right. But I had to get there. And again, I think it was me coming to terms with just taking my own ego out of it and really honestly trying to respect what I was doing. And I like that. I liked it. I liked having a reason to do that. And I was telling someone recently, they were asking me if I would ever do any different genres. And the answer is yes. I can't wait to do like a sci-fi film. I want to do some weirdo anything, that if I gravitate to a script or an idea, I think that's just where the shift comes in my brain or in my philosophy on how to make something. So I try to be open. But then again, if you really want to think about it, the scripts that I read and gravitate to, they have to touch me in a certain way. And so there is a specific going on, but I am trying to be open to different genres and realms of filmmaking. There's this film I really, really loved over the last couple of years called After Blue. It's by Bertrand Mandino. And it's just this completely free, insane, like colors, and even the concept is insane. It's these women that live on a planet on their own. And of course they kick the men out because they're ruining everything. And it's like stylized in a way it feels very homemade, but it's also over the top in certain ways. And there's something about it. There's like an honesty within that chaos that makes me really happy. So I'm open to everything. And I've heard that before, like, oh, you're going to get pigeonholed if you keep doing these sort of scrappy movies on 16 millimeter about junkies in Hollywood or whatever. Like, I get it, but maybe I had to get that out of my system because that's something I really love. Like, I love early Gus Van Sant films. I love Harmony Korine. I love the sort of honesty in the naivety. I love things that feel authentic, even though it's obvious that we're making films. Authentic is a abstract word at that point because what we're doing is imaginary. But the things I gravitate to, like the Dardenne brothers, are my favorites. When I first started watching those films, I thought they were documentary. So that's like part of my personal love of things. But I am trying to expand every day. I'm just trying to really explore. And if I see a movie that I like or appreciate, I always say to myself, oh man, I want to do something like that. After I saw Ida, I like flipped out and I told my agents, like, I want to do a movie in Europe. I want to do something like that. And I haven't done exactly that, but I did a movie in Finland and I did a movie this summer in Greece. And I really do like to explore different cultures, different genres. And I don't want that part to stop. That's sort of the joy of this whole experience, is learning and exploring and being challenged with something that's not exactly in your wheelhouse.
Do you ever find yourself turning things down because of a budget?
No, I don't think so. I think if the budget is aligned with what's on the page and it's $50,000 or it's $50 million, then it doesn't matter. But if the budget isn't there to support making what's on the page, then I have a problem with it. But that doesn't come up too often. I think it's like, okay, if you're doing $100,000 movie with a first-time director and it's going to be 2.5 weeks in downtown LA, like, that's doable. You can do that because you're going to have nothing, but you don't need anything, So that exact scenario doesn't really come up too much where it doesn't match. But for me, in regards to what that number is, if I love the idea and the concept, that part doesn't matter. I do want to say that's a privileged position to be in, to say that, but I live pretty low overhead. I've been in my same apartment for 25 years. It's rent control. I've never had a new car in my life. There's certain ways that I live to sort of support that fantasy of making whatever I want to make.
What are the benefits of living frugally?
Well, that's exactly the benefit, is that I can pick whatever I want to do. And I do commercials to make money in between my film, which is just like a really great way to offset your budget in your life. But that movie, Warm Blood, I don't know if you came to the book release, but we're having our LA premiere on December 1st in LA. And it's like, we built our budget through friends and selling art together. Like, we didn't have money. So it took us 10 years to make it. But we would go and shoot for a week, and then we would like create a reason to have a party or an art show, and friends would donate photographs and paintings and embroidered bags and things like that. And we'd say, all right, we got 12 grand. We can go out for 6 days right now. And we did that over the course of maybe 8 years. And so that's just like a love for creating things and finding out what happens after you do it. It's like this itch that I have to scratch. Like, I don't like drawing those lines, and I don't say no to things because of a budget number being too low,
Yeah, actually I did go to the book release, or the whatever it was. There was like an event where you were I went to that thing. And you know what it reminded me of? You had like storyboards on the wall. There was like props. There was a room playing like a montage of some of the faces. And it definitely reminded me of the books that you make or used to make about films that you'd shot. Like, do you still do that? And I guess, why did you do that?
Yeah, well, the first book that I made was the Gus Van Sant film, Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot. And this goes back to the story where Gus called me to do that film. And I was out in the desert in Arizona with my wife visiting her family, and the sun was setting, and I was just kind of having a moment. And I just took a walk, and I went out into the desert, and I was thinking about Harris, and I was thinking about how lucky I was at that moment. And I thought to myself, is there a way I can pay homage to Harris? Is there a way I can do something to really respect that fact that I'm doing it and he's not alive anymore? And what happened was I went back to what it was like working with Harris, and part of my job was to document. And so I was the one that took the Polaroids, and I was the one that wrote down all the notes, and we did the lighting diagrams. And there was another assistant, Steve Matzinger, who was a really good illustrator. And we would make these incredible books at the end of a job. We would have these really amazing books. So that was where the book idea came in. And I had Jake McGee, who was my loader at the time. He's a DP now. He's a really good artist. So we were really diligent about taking Polaroids, doing a diagram, and we ended up with all of this really cool ephemera. So that was how my first book was made and what it was made of. And then I did one for mid-90s, of course. And then Jonah actually helped me with the budget for that. But they're really expensive. So I have all of the material to do First Cow and other films, but I haven't had the time or resources to actually make it. But maybe one day they'll be made.
That's so cool. I mean, I feel like that just speaks so much to your passion for this. Like, it's definitely not common for like DPs to go that extra mile. And it just seems like it comes from such a deep passion of like photography and shooting on film and compiling and archiving. And yeah, it's super inspiring. I kind of wanted to touch on your philosophy on sort of setting rules for yourself. And I just think that like in this time that we live in, there's just so much saturation of trends and technology and access to cameras. And I just feel like the more I learn about our craft and stuff, it just seems like the people who are operating at a really high level seem to have a really good handle on like the concept of restraint and how to be restrained. And you've talked about so much of that over the course of this conversation about really listening and really being present for what you're receiving from your director and trying to be really considered and intentional. And so it's a general question, just what is the importance of restraint to you and intentionality?
That is a good question. I think that for me, it comes from the idea of really trying to respect what you're doing, respect the script, and respect the inspirations and ideas that your director have. But there's another thing going on here with me anyway, which is if you're really trying to make something feel and seem authentic and thoughtful, if you really, really, really think about that, what's going to happen to you is you're going to really try to be considerate of why you're doing anything and everything. So when you're designing a shot list, when you're thinking about a lighting schematic, when you're thinking about art direction, all layers of filmmaking, if you put it through the lens of authenticity and what that means, right? And respect for your script and your story, you'll start to strip things away. If you're asking yourself, why am I doing this dolly track? Why do I have this steady cam shot? Is it a function of moving your narrative along? Or is it cool? Like, what is the real reason? And when you put every single thing that you do through that filter, you'll find, or at least from my perspective, you'll find that you start to strip things down and it becomes a simplistic approach. That's like my sort of baseline statement for that idea. But I say this a lot, and I don't know, I hope it's not trite at this point, but I think that Kelly's films to me are very thoughtful films. And they're thoughtful because it gives the viewer a chance to be a part of what's going on, because you're sharing the quiet moments with them as well as the maybe extraordinary moments. So with that idea, if you're thoughtful about all of the things that you're providing or what you're imposing on the image, if you're just thoughtful, literally that word of being thoughtful about it, I think that you can make a thoughtful film. I think that translates into a thoughtful film. And it's very simple. And I think that it's funny because there's a part of you, maybe when you're starting as a cinematographer and you really want to prove yourself and you want to sort of make a statement. And I get it. I get the reasons why you would want to do all of these kind of cool things and make an interesting frame or whatever that is. But I think the more I learned in this business, and tons of what I've learned from Harris, was the most simplistic approach was always the best one. And there's times, like, for example, in mid-90s, Jonah came to me with Gus films, with Harmony, we watched This Is England. We watched like a lot of these films that were great, great inspirations for us. And he really did want to make a movie that was in that conversation, in the thoughtful realm of imposing or what you're saying or what you're putting on the screen, right? And so what happened was we decided not to move the camera at all. We weren't moving at all. Like, I think the opening scene is a square shot of a hallway and the kid his brother beats him up right in camera. And because you're not cutting into a close-up of a fist hitting a jaw or whatever, it feels closer to real. It feels closer to something authentic. Because what's the most authentic thing you can do, which is just a camera in a room watching two people fight? That could be real. Maybe they are fighting, or a documentary, right? But this philosophical conversation can go very deep, but it's like even the camera in the room makes it a bit unauthentic. But we're not lying that we're making a film. We're accepting that idea that we're making a film. And so that's what minimized this. But I did want to bring that up because there was a moment in the middle of that film where he goes to the party and we have this super long Steadicam shot that we choreographed through this whole house with kids going here and there. But that was us releasing the valve. We sort of earned that moment, I felt. And it's more special because if the whole movie was moving around and dollying and Steadicamming, it wouldn't have the impact that it did. It wouldn't feel as special as it did. So I don't know. I guess my point is that if you're really, really respectful about what you're doing and when and why and how, you can get away with things like that. And they actually can be more expressive and cool and feel like we wanted the audience to feel like what it was like going to your first party and drinking a 40 ounce and there's girls around. Like, how exciting is that? You know what I mean? And so we sort of earned that moment. And I like talking about that because it's something that comes from that same ethic of really considering what you're doing and what you're imposing on the image.
Okay, I think that would be a great way to end things. I do have one more question, though. So this could be edited out.
Yeah. Ending, you can cut that. Yeah.
Okay, this is like something that I am always like spinning around in my head, but like I love what you're saying about being intentional, having restraint in cinematography, and having both intellectual and emotional reasons to do things. When it comes to commercials, and you might get the direction, Blauvelt, make it look sexy, you know? Are you channeling like Harmony Korine Gummo, like bacon taped to the wall, black metal, or like, you know? How do you then find the beauty that is commercial?
That's funny. I don't know. I mean, that's a really good question because it does sort of go against this idea that I'm speaking of, right? But there's something else going on in commercials, which is usually the directors, they really care about them. Like when they send you their pitch, you know, it's taken them a lot of writing to get that thing sold or to be the one that got picked, right? So they're playing this game of trying to make something unique, but also respecting the thing they're selling or the company that they're selling something for. So it's kind of strange, but I feel like it's easy for me to get behind that passion no matter what. And the other side of it is that I get more resources on my commercials than I will in like all my movies. So it's a time for me to really play the game, play that part. Like, okay, you know what it's like when you're on a project and you say to yourself, well, if I was Chivo right now, I would silk this entire block out and we'd have a fly swatter and a blah, blah, blah. But on commercials, I can get that thing and I want to see what it's like. I've never silked out half of a block before, but when I'm selling puppy chow or whatever the fuck it's, they're going to give it to me. So like, I really enjoy it. And again, it's like if I'm pleasing my director and they're happy with what's going on, it's just a new challenge. And I honestly feel that there's always something to be learned. And not to mention, I drag my crews through so much shit on these low budget movies where we're all like blood, sweat, and tears. Like when I look over and they're eating lobster and they're all the trucks are paid for, I'm kind of like, hell yeah. I'm finally, you know, I'm not always such a piece of shit. Like I can pay them back sometimes.
Those are all literally such good reasons. Like
You know what I
every
mean?
single one of them is really, really good.
It's to me, it's about a ratio, right? Like, you know, I've been promising my wife we're going to move out of the apartment and buy a house forever. And I'm like, babe, all I got to do is like put my head down for a year and do commercials. And she's like, yeah, right. You're going to do some indie movies. Also. She loves it. I'm saying this to be funny, but the truth is that the ratio is like 90 to 10, you know, 85 to 15 movies versus commercials. But, you know, that's the life that we chose. And we know that we're happy, you know, and so there's nothing better than having nothing and making something that you're really proud of, you know? There's just nothing like it. It's the best. It's sublime, you know?
I think it's a great point too, that like that passion in a short-term way, quicker timelines and stuff does often exist if it's a good director with a commercial brief, and like how it's something to latch onto, just like a feature project or a narrative project. That's a really cool way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and a lot of the directors want to make films too, you know? So it's even a training ground for them. And they know it. So they're also exploring and sneaking in little things that they can that can be related to like a film or, you know, there's a lot of under the surface things going on too that are exciting to me. And again, having the resources to do it and throw money at something like that, you know, it's like you don't get to do it, you know, like one fat commercial could pay for like 2 of my indie movies. Movies, you know.
Chris, seriously, cannot thank you enough for coming on the show. And I just feel super, super lucky. Ava, thank you for like bringing Chris into the fold. And Chris, thank you for saying yes. And yeah, it means a ton to me to be able to just kind of absorb all this incredible wisdom and hear about your stories and be able to watch the projects and just be so inspired. So yeah, thank you, Chris. And thank you to the both of you for this conversation.
Thank you, Peter and Ava. I really appreciated it. Thank you for having me.
This episode of the Cinematography Salon podcast was produced by Peter Pascucci, Ava Benjamin Shore, and David Kruta, with original music by One Wave and edited by Corey Abel. We created this episode in partnership with the Cinematography Salon, and we would like to extend a special thanks to the Salon community for supporting our efforts with this show. We'd also like to extend our gratitude to Able Cine for their continued support. If you're unfamiliar with their offerings, Able Cine provides services such as equipment rentals, sales, maintenance, training, and much more. Additionally, they host complimentary events at their various locations. For more details, please visit ablecine.com. If you enjoyed listening to the show, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and news. Thanks.